Nia Solano did not check the weather when she woke up. She checked her citizenship index. The number hovered in the air above her wrist projector, a pale blue hologram that dictated the quality of her morning 792. She was 8 points away from Tier 2 status. 8 points away from an apartment with a window that faced something other than the ventilation shaft of the opposing mega. Blocked. 8 points away from authorized heating in the winter. She dismissed the display with a flick of her finger and moved to the kitchenette. The routine was a ritual of survival, not comfort. She pulled a packet of synthesized oats from the dispenser, bland gray and nutrient-dense. She wasn't hungry, but the algorithm rewarded consistency in caloric intake. A healthy citizen was a productive citizen, but she didn't heat the water for herself. She heated it for Unit 809, Mr. Vance. He was her community engagement metric. In the gamified lattice of the New Columbia habitation zones, altruism was no longer an emotion. It was a transaction. You helped the elderly, you tutored the youth, you reported sedition, and the system rewarded you with points. Nia had calculated the math 3 years ago, bringing breakfast to Elias Vance, a 70-year-old man with bad knees and a legacy status that barred him from most automated services, yielded a consistent 0.5 points per day. It was slow, grinding work, but it was safe. It required no political opinions, no public speaking, and no risk of audit. She poured the oats into a thermal container, snapped the lid shut, and checked her appearance in the reflective surface of the microwave. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, the strands tight against her scalp. Her uniform, gray administrative tunics over black slacks, was pressed. She looked like exactly what she was, a Tier 3 data processor who followed the rules so hard they had etched themselves into the posture of her spine. Nia grabbed the container and stepped into the hallway. The air in Block 4 always smelled of ozone and recycled bleach. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the surveillance cameras swiveling in their glass domes every 15 seconds. Nia kept her head down, walking along the designated pedestrian strip. To step outside the lines was a minor infraction. Passing arrow? That cost 0.1 points. She couldn't afford the deduction. She reached the elevator and waited. When the doors slid open, she stepped in, pressing the button for the 8th floor. The ride was smooth, silent. She rehearsed the interaction in her head. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. I hope you slept well. Here is your meal." He would smile, his skin crinkling around tired, milky eyes, and say something about the weather he couldn't see. She would log the interaction on her wrist pad, the GPS would verify her location, and the system would dispense her 0.5 points. It was a perfect, closed loop. When the elevator opened on the 8th floor, the atmosphere shifted. The air here felt thinner, colder. Unit 809 was at the end of the hall, near the waste disposal chute. As Nia walked, the thermal container warm against her palm. She noticed the silence was different here. Usually, she could hear the faint murmur of the morning news feeds leaking through the thin walls of the apartments. Today, the hallway was a vacuum. She stopped in front of 809. Her hand raised to knock, a reflex honed by 600 consecutive mornings. But her knuckles never made contact. The door was ajar. In the habitation blocks, doors did not stay ajar. The magnetic locks engaged automatically the moment a tenant crossed the threshold. A door standing open was a system failure, or worse. "Mr. Vance." Nia's voice was a whisper, barely loud enough to trigger the hallway audio sensors. No answer. She pushed the door with her fingertips. It swung inward soundlessly. The apartment was usually cluttered with the debris of a long life, stacks of paper books, old ceramic figurines, a heavy woolen rug that smelled of dust and peppermint. Mr. Vance was a hoarder of things the new world deemed obsolete. But today, the room was a void. Nia stepped inside, the breath catching in her throat. The apartment had been scrubbed. The books were gone. The figurines were gone. The rug was gone. The furniture, The heavy armchair he slept in, the small dining table, had been removed. The floor was bare concrete, still wet in patches. The smell hit her then. It wasn't the peppermint of Mr. Vance's tea. It was a chemical acridity, industrial-grade ammonia and something sharper, metallic, like copper pennies. Mr. Vance, she said again. Louder this time, she walked to the center of the room. The kitchenette cupboards were open and empty. The bed frame was stripped to the metal slats. It was as if Elias Vance had never existed. It was as if he had been deleted from the code of the building. Then she saw it. Near the window, on the damp concrete where his armchair used to sit, was a stain. It was dark, almost black against the gray floor. The scrubbers had missed it, or perhaps it was too deep to scrub out. A single jagged splash pattern. Nia stared at it. Her brain tried to categorize the data. Spilled coffee. Oil. She stepped closer, the sole of her shoe squeaking on the wet floor. The shape was wrong for coffee. It was too viscous. Fear, cold and immediate, flooded her chest. It wasn't concern for the old man. That was the terrible truth she wouldn't admit, even to herself. It wasn't worry about where he was. It was the realization that she was standing in an anomaly. She was standing in a deviation. The system did not like deviations. Her wrist unit buzzed. Reminder log community engagement activity. The vibration felt like a bee sting. Nia looked down. The prompt blinked in blue. Confirm interaction with resident 809 VNCE. If she clicked yes, she was lying. He wasn't here. If she clicked no, she had to file a missing resident report. A missing resident report triggered an investigation. An investigation meant the Interior Defense Force, IDF, would audit her timeline. They would ask why she was the first to find him. They would ask what she knew about his legacy, artifacts. They would look at her search history. They would look at her father's history. Nia backed away. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't be part of this. She was 8 points away from Tier 2. She was so close to safety. Being associated with a scrubbed apartment, with a blood stain, would freeze her score for months, maybe years. She looked at the thermal container in her hand. The oatmeal. She couldn't leave it. It was evidence she had been here. Clutching the container to her chest, she backed out of the apartment. She reached for the door handle and pulled it gently until it rested in the ajar position, exactly as she had found it. She wiped the handle with her sleeve. She turned and walked back to the elevator. She didn't run. Running was suspicious. Running triggered gait analysis algorithms. She walked at a measured pace, though her legs felt like they were filled with lead. Inside the elevator, she pressed the button for her floor. As the doors closed, sealing her in the safety of the box, she looked at her wrist. Confirm interaction with resident 809 VNCE. Her finger hovered over the interface. She could report it. She could be a good citizen. She pressed cancel. A new prompt appeared, reason for cancellation. She typed resident unavailable. Do not disturb. It was a lie, a direct falsification of logs, a Class 4 felony if discovered. But the fear of the stain on the floor was greater than the fear of the lie. Nia returned to her apartment. She poured the oatmeal down the sink, running the disposal unit until every grain was pulverized. She washed the container 3 times. Then she sat at her small desk and logged into her work terminal, her hands trembling so badly she mistyped her password twice. She worked for 3 hours. She processed data forms for water allocation in the Midwest sector. She kept her breathing steady. She didn't look at the news. She didn't look at her score. She told herself it was fine. Mr. Vance had probably been moved to a medical facility. The cleaning crew had just been overzealous. The stain was just grease. She was safe. She had followed the protocol of self-preservation. Then the sound came. It wasn't the chime of the door communicator. It wasn't the buzzer. It was a physical knock, heavy. 3 impacts that shook the composite frame of her door. Nia froze. No one knocked. Deliveries were automated. Neighbors messaged. Maintenance sent alerts. Only one type of visitor knocked. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She moved to the door, pressing her eye to the optical peephole. The hallway was distorted by the fisheye lens, but the figures were unmistakable. There were 3 of them. They weren't wearing the blue uniforms of the local police. They were wearing the matte, black, kinetic armor of the Interior Defense Force. Their faces were covered by ballistic visors. They carried short-barreled suppression rifles slung across their chests. One of them, the officer in the center, raised a gloved hand and knocked again. Harder. Nia Solano, a voice boomed, synthesized and amplified through a helmet speaker. Unit 402. Open the door. Nia backed away, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. They knew. They knew she had been there. They knew she had lied. She didn't move toward the lock. She couldn't. But she didn't have to. With a high-pitched electronic whine, the magnetic locks on her door disengaged from the outside. The green light on her control panel turned red. The handle turned. The door swung open, revealing the corridor light that seemed blindingly white compared to the dim sanctity of Nia's apartment. The 3 figures stepped inside with a synchronized fluidity that suggested they shared a single nervous system. They did not storm the room. They did not shout, "Freeze," or "Get down." They simply occupied the space, their sheer physical bulk absorbing the air, making the small room feel like a coffin. Nia backed up until her legs hit the edge of her mattress. She sat down hard, the springs creaking loudly in the sudden silence. The officer in the center, the one who had knocked, scanned the room. His helmet was a smooth, black carapace, featureless except for a thin, glowing amber strip where his eyes should be. He held his rifle not in a threatening posture, but in a low-ready position, the barrel pointed at the floor, suggesting that violence was not the goal, merely a procedural option. "Citizen Nia Solano," the synthesized voice said again. It was flat, stripped of regional accent or human inflection. ID 492 Delta 9. Nia tried to speak, but her throat was dry, sandpaper rubbing against itself. She nodded. "Verbal confirmation required," the officer said. "Yes," she whispered. "I am Nia Solano." The officer did not move closer. Instead, he raised his left forearm. A holographic interface bloomed from his wrist gauntlet, projecting a grid of data into the air between them. Nia recognized the layout. It was a timeline of her morning. Yo6 of 45 wake cycle initiated, 702 nutrient consumption logged. Zo7 12s and 402 Zo7s and 15 elevator transit to level 8. The list went on, terrifyingly accurate, cataloging her existence down to the second. It stopped at Zo7 18. "We have flagged a data integrity error in your morning log," the officer said. "At Yo7 18, you initiated a community engagement protocol with Unit 809 Resident Vance. You then canceled the protocol citing Resident Unavailable. However, you remained in the vicinity of Unit 809 for 94 seconds before retreating." The officer tilted his head slightly, the amber light shifting. 94 seconds is a statistical outlier for a non-interaction. "Why did you loiter?" "Citizen." Nia's hands gripped the edge of the mattress until her knuckles turned white. This was it. They were going to ask about the blood. They were going to ask about the smell of copper and ammonia. I thought I heard something." Nia lied. Her voice trembled, betraying her instantly. "I waited to see if he would answer." "Audit of hallway audio sensors indicates ambient silence." The officer countered immediately. "Your heart rate, however, spiked to 140 beats per minute during that interval. This indicates an acute stress response." He took a step forward. The floorboards groaned under the weight of his armor. "Did you enter Unit 809, citizen?" Nia stared at the black visor. The reflection of her own face was warped and tiny on its surface. If she said yes, she admitted to seeing the crime scene. She admitted to seeing the cracks in the system. But if she said no, she was lying to an IDF officer, and they clearly had the biometrics to prove it. Her fatal flaw, that desperate, clawing need to remain safe, to remain categorized, kicked in. She couldn't be a witness. Witnesses were liabilities. She had to be a statistic. I opened the door. Nia said, her voice barely audible. Just a crack. I saw that he wasn't there. It startled me. Mr. Vance is always there. It disrupted my routine. That is why my heart rate spiked. The officer stood motionless for a long moment. Processing. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. Visual confirmation of vacancy. The officer stated. You observed that the unit was empty. Yes. Did you observe anything else? Nia swallowed. The image of the dark, jagged stain burned behind her eyelids. No, she lied. Just an empty room. So I left. I didn't want to intrude. The officer lowered his arm. The hologram vanished. The tension in the room did not dissipate. It merely shifted frequency. He wasn't arresting her. He wasn't cuffing her. This creates a conflict in the public record, the officer said, his tone sounding almost bored. The occupant of Unit 809, Elias Vance, has been designated asset reclaimed as of 0400 this morning. His residency contract was terminated due to non-compliance with health mandates. Asset reclaimed. The phrase was sterile, industrial. It sounded like they had recalled a defective toaster, not a human being. If you log resident unavailable, implies a temporary state. The officer continued. It implies the resident still holds claim to the space. This prevents the housing algorithm from assigning the unit to a new applicant. We have a backlog of 4,000 Tier 2 applicants waiting for space. Nia blinked, confused. I don't understand. Your log is inefficient, the officer said. It delays progress. We are here to assist you in correcting the entry. One of the other officers, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. He held out a tablet. It was a ruggedized slate with a single prompt glowing on the screen. Amand Lao Gntry. Yo 718. Hamfin resident sleeping, Haquin resident absent, a asset reclaimed, a vacancy verified. Select the third option. The lead officer instructed. This will close the loop. It will verify that you witnessed the vacancy. It will allow the system to release the apartment. Nia looked at the tablet. It was a trap. She knew it was a trap. But she couldn't see the teeth. If she clicked that button, she was agreeing with their version of history. She was agreeing that Mr. Vance had been reclaimed, a lawful process, and not whatever violence had caused that blood stain. By clicking the button, she would be erasing the blood. She would be cleaning the floor alongside the scrubbers. But Nia started, her voice shaking. If I verify the vacancy, do I get the points? It was a monstrous question, a hideous, selfish thought that bubbled up from the depths of her conditioning. She hated herself for asking it, but she had to know. The officer paused. Affirmative. Verification of asset reclaiming is a Tier 4 civic duty. It is worth 2.0 points. Significantly higher than a standard meal delivery. 2 points. 2 points would put her at 794. 6 points away from a window. 6 points away from heat. I didn't know he was reclaimed, Nia said, justifying it to the empty air. I just saw the room was empty. Correct the record, citizen, the officer said. It was not a request. Nia reached out. Her finger hovered over the glass screen. She thought of Mr. Vance's hands, shaking as he took the oatmeal from her day after day. She thought of the stories he tried to tell her about the time before the walls, stories she always cut short because she had to get to work. She touched the screen. Selection confirmed. Asset reclaimed, a vacancy verified. 2.0 The tablet beeped, a cheerful, major key chime that sounded grotesque in the tense room. The officer took the tablet back. Efficient? He said. Your cooperation is noted. They turned to leave. The sudden release of pressure was dizzying. Nia felt like she might vomit. They were leaving. She was alive. She was safe. She had points. But at the door, the lead officer stopped. He didn't turn around. He simply paused in the frame. Citizen Solano, he said, Regarding the cleaning solution used in Unit 809, the crews were in a rush. Sometimes they miss residues. Nia froze. If you noticed any residues, the officer continued, but it is best not to mention them. Hygiene reports require extensive quarantine periods for the reporting witness. You would lose your work shifts. You would lose points. He turned his head slightly, just enough for the amber eye, stripped to catch her in its periphery. You didn't see any residues, did you? Nia stood in the center of her apartment, her heart hollowed out. They knew. They knew she had seen the blood. They had just made her sign a document saying she hadn't. They had paid her 2 points to sell her silence, and now they were threatening her livelihood if she tried to give the money back. Nia whispered. The floor was clean. Good, the officer said. A clean building is a safe building. He stepped out. The door hissed shut. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy thud. Nia stood there for a long time. The room was exactly as it had been 10 minutes ago. The same gray walls. The same recycled air. But the atmosphere had changed. The safety of her apartment felt different now. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cell that she was allowed to occupy as long as she remained useful. She looked at her wrist. The number 794 glowed in the air. She walked to the window, the fake window that looked into the ventilation shaft. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Down below, in the pedestrian strips, life was moving. People were walking to work. Delivery drones were buzzing. The injustice wasn't that they had killed Elias Vance. The injustice was that they had made her help bury him, and the world hadn't stopped for a single second. Her communicator pinged. A generic message from the building administration. Attention Rasides Unit 809 is now available for occupancy. Please welcome our new neighbors arriving at 1200 p.m. Community harmony is mandatory. Nia stared at the message. It had been less than an hour. They were already erasing the empty space he had left behind. She needed to get to work. She couldn't be late. Lateness cost 0.5 points. Nia Solano smoothed her tunic, picked up her bag, and walked out of her door, stepping over the invisible threshold where she had just sold her soul for a heater she didn't even have yet. A week passed. 7 days of waking up, checking the number, now hovering at 795 thanks to a punctuality bonus, and eating the gray oats. The routine had reassembled itself around the hole in the world where Elias Vance used to be, like scar tissue closing over a wound. At work, Nia sat in a cubicle farm that stretched to the vanishing point, a horizon of gray felt dividers and glowing blue screens. Her job was data verification for the Department of Resource Allocation. Usually, she processed water usage disputes or energy overages. But this week, the queue was different. Asset reclaimed. Asset reclaimed. Asset reclaimed. The phrase flashed across her screen in rapid succession. Block 6. Block 12. Block 4, the data was anonymized, stripped of names and faces, reduced to ID strings and square footage. But Nia knew the code now. She knew that asset reclaimed meant a scrubbed floor and a smell like copper pennies. She noticed something else in the data streams. The ages. The reclaimed assets were overwhelmingly over 65. They were the legacy population, the ones who remembered a time before the citizenship index, the ones who still owned paper books and cooked with raw ingredients. The system wasn't just recycling apartments, it was pruning a demographic. Nia processed the files. Click, confirm. Next, click, confirm, next. Her fatal flaw was her ability to compartmentalize. She convinced herself that she was just organizing the database. She wasn't pulling the trigger, she was just filing the paperwork for the bullet. On Tuesday evening, she returned to Block 4. As she stepped off the elevator on the 8th floor, she braced herself for the silence of the hallway. Instead, she heard music. It was synthetic jazz, bright and geometrically perfect, drifting from Unit 809. The door was open again, but this time it was propped by a sleek, magnetic doorstop. A man was standing in the center of the room. He looked to be about 30, with the sculpted, poreless skin of someone who could afford Tier 1 gene therapy. He was wearing a smart, fabric lounge suit that shimmered slightly as he moved. He was unpacking. But he wasn't unpacking books or ceramic figurines. He was unpacking sensors. Smart speakers, mood lighting arrays, humidity regulators. He was wiring the apartment into the building's central nervous system. Nia tried to walk past, head down, but he saw her. "Neighbor?" he called out. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. It bounced off the concrete walls. Nia stopped. To ignore a direct greeting from a neighbor was a social cohesion deduction of 0.2 points. She turned. "Good evening. I'm Julian," he said, stepping into the hallway. He extended a hand. He didn't have a wrist projector. He had the high-end subdermal implant. His citizenship index glowed softly from under his skin 940. A Tier 1. A gold citizen. What was a gold doing in a Tier 3 block? "Nia," she said, taking his hand. "It was dry and warm, just moving in," Julian said, gesturing to the apartment. "Great space. A bit analog, you know. The previous tenant must have been a Luddite. The connectivity in here was practically zero. I had to rip out the old copper wiring just to get a signal." Nia looked past him, into the room. The floor was covered in a plush, white carpet. It hid everything. The stain was gone. The history was gone. The room smelled of lavender and ozone, the scent of expensive air purifiers. "Yes," Nia said. He was old-fashioned. Julian laughed. "Well, out with the old, right? I'm in optimization. We analyze habitation patterns to maximize happiness metrics. The company wanted me to live out on the ground for a while. Gather data from the source." He leaned against the doorframe, his eyes scanning Nia with professional curiosity. "You've been here a while, right, Nia? The logs say you were the community engagement partner for this unit." Nia's stomach turned to ice. "Yes, I brought breakfast." "Quaint," Julian said. He used the word like a slur. "Inefficient, though. I saw the logs. You spent an average of 4 minutes per morning on the transaction. That's 28 minutes a week. Multiply that by 50, 2 weeks. You wasted 24 hours a year just walking oatmeal down a hallway." He shook his head, smiling pityingly. "Think of what you could have done with that time. You could have learned a new code language. You could have meditated. You could have raised your index." "It was for the points," Nia said defensively. "Points are the gamification of value," Julian corrected. "But true value is optimization. That old man, he was a resource sink. He consumed calories, heat, and space, and produced nothing but carbon dioxide and nostalgia. The system did him a favor. And it did you a favor, too. Now you're free to invest your energy elsewhere." He looked at her, expecting agreement. He expected her to be grateful that the burden of Elias Vance had been removed. "Welcome to the building," Nia whispered. She pulled away and walked quickly down the hall to the elevator. She didn't go to her apartment. She felt like she was suffocating. She needed to go down, to the basement, to the laundry banks. The noise of the machines usually soothed her. The basement was a cavern of concrete and steam. Rows of industrial washers churned gray water. The air was thick with the smell of chemical detergent. Nia found a free machine and loaded her uniforms. She leaned against the vibrating metal, closing her eyes. "He's right, you know." The voice came from the shadows behind the boiler units. Nia jumped, spinning around. A man stepped out. It was Darius, the building's maintenance custodian. He was a 0, a citizen with a score below 500. He wore the orange jumpsuit of the manual labor class. His face was lined with grime that never quite washed off, and his eyes were old, sharp, and dangerous. "Darius." Nia breathed. "You startled me. The gold upstairs," Darius said, nodding toward the ceiling. "Julian. He's right. About the efficiency." Darius moved closer, dragging a heavy canvas laundry cart. It was filled with wet, dark fabrics. Nia looked closer and realized they were clothes, woolen sweaters, tweed jackets, old, soft flannel shirts. They were Mr. Vance's clothes, and not just his. There were floral dresses, knitted shawls, wide-brimmed hats. The clothes of the old. The clothes of the reclaimed. "What are you doing with those?" Nia asked, her voice trembling. "Washing them," Darius said. "To be shredded. Recycled into insulation for the new luxury blocks they're building downtown. Nothing goes to waste." He stopped the cart in front of her. He looked at her with an intensity that made her want to run. "You think the officers came because of the breakfast, don't you?" Darius asked softly. Nia didn't answer. "They didn't come because of the food, Nia. They came because of the habit," Darius said. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "The system doesn't mind charity. Charity is a tax write-off. What the system hates is unauthorized dependency." He pulled a wet flannel shirt from the cart. Water dripped onto the concrete floor. "You were going there every day?" Darius continued. "You were listening to him. You were forming a bond that wasn't mediated by a screen. That creates a social blind spot, a pocket of reality they can't measure. When two people talk in a room without a device listening, that's sedition." Nia shook her head. "I was just getting my points. It was a transaction, was it?" Darius challenged. "Toward the end, you stayed longer than the point allocation required. I saw the logs too. You stayed for the stories. You liked him." Nia felt tears prick her eyes. "He was lonely. Loneliness is a market driver," Darius said. People aren't lonely. They don't consume entertainment. They don't buy connection packages. You were disrupting the market, Nia. You were fixing a problem for free." He tossed the wet shirt into the massive industrial shredder in the corner. He hit the button. The machine roared, a terrible, grinding sound that swallowed the fabric instantly. "The pattern is simple." Darius yelled over the noise. "They take the ones who remember, and they scare the ones who remain into silence. You signed the paper, didn't you?" Asset reclaimed. Nia nodded, shame burning her face. "Then you're part of the crew now," Darius said bitterly. "Welcome to the cleanup detail." The machine fell silent. Nia grabbed her laundry, wet and heavy, and ran for the elevator. When she got back to her apartment, she locked the door. She engaged the deadbolt. She turned off the lights. She sat in the dark, watching the citizenship index float above her wrist, 795. She was safe. She was close to tier 2. But then, a notification chimed in the darkness. A bright blue rectangle unfolded in the air. You have been inactive for 7 days. To maintain Tier 3 status, you must log a new engagement partner within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in a status downgrade to Tier 4. A map appeared. It showed her building. A red dot pulsed on the 4th floor. 3-door from her own Gestabide Pavarasa 1045 Gorabrali. Haji 72. Stats Usas ACSH Resk. The system was hungry. It had eaten Mr. Vance. Now it wanted another course, and it was ordering Nia to serve the meal. If she didn't go, she lost her status. She lost her home. She became a zero like Darius. If she went, she was marking Martha Gable for death. Nia stared at the name. Martha Gable. She knew her. A quiet woman who knit scarves. Nia stood up. She walked to the kitchenette. She reached for the oats. Her hands moved automatically. Pour heat. Seal. The fatal flaw, the need to survive. The obedience to the glowing number moved her muscles for her. She wasn't a monster. She was just a girl who didn't want to freeze in the winter. She picked up the thermal container. She unlocked her door. Nia stood outside Unit 405. The door was identical to Unit 829, the same chipped gray paint, the same magnetic lock humming with a low-voltage threat. Inside was Martha Gable. Nia checked her wrist. Yo 7:12 a.m. She had a plan. Efficiency was the only shield. She would enter, deliver the oats, secure the biometric confirmation of receipt, and leave within 60 seconds. No conversation, no listening. If there was no connection, there was no social blind spot. If she was just a delivery drone made of flesh, The system would have no reason to hurt Martha. She knocked. The door opened. Martha Gable was small, bird-like, wrapped in layers of knitted shawls despite the building's regulated temperature. Her eyes were bright, eager. "Oh, hello," Martha chirped. "You must be Nia. The system sent a notification. It's so nice to have a visitor. My grandson used to visit, but he moved to the coastal sector." "Good morning, Ms. Gable," Nia interrupted. Her voice was robotic, clipped. She thrust the thermal container forward. "Here is your nutritional supplement. Please place your thumb on the pad to confirm receipt." Martha blinked, confused by the coldness. "Oh, of course. Won't you come in? I have some real tea. I saved a bag from last month's ration." "I cannot," Nia said. "I am on a strict schedule." "Thumb, please." Martha's smile faltered. She reached out with a trembling hand and pressed her thumb to Nia's wrist unit. "Ko-fi RMED. "Fine to ask, thank you. Have a productive day," Nia said. She turned on her heel and walked away before the old woman could say another word. She felt the weight of Martha's disappointment hitting her back like a physical blow, but she kept walking. "I am saving you," Nia thought desperately. "I am being a bad neighbor to be a good protector." She rode the elevator down to the ground floor, her heart racing. She had done it. 60 seconds, no connection, safe. But the doubt was a splinter in her mind. At work, the doubt grew. The cubicle farm was humming with the sound of 1,000 keyboards, the white noise of bureaucracy. Nia pulled up her queue. More asset reclaimed, files, more prunings. She couldn't focus. The image of the bloodstain in Vance's apartment superimposed itself over the spreadsheets. Julian's words echoed died optimization. Darius's words echoed unauthorized dependency. Nia looked around. Her supervisor, a heavy, set man named Kale with a Tier 2 index, was asleep at his desk, his headset askew. She did something she had never done in 5 years of service. She minimized her work queue and opened the archive search tool. It was a violation of protocol. Misuse of company resources flag would deduct 5 points, but she had to know. She typed Casafiel at 809 VNCE, Rasidian Hasto RY. The screen flashed red Ries Trade ACS, CDLRC Level 4 Akuirad. Nia's fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't have level 4, but she worked in data verification. She knew the backdoors the system used to reconcile errors. She switched the search parameter from resident history to billing disputes. Every reclamation had a bill, cleaning costs, disposal fees. If there was a bill, there was an itemized list. The screen flickered and loaded. INVOIC FAN 992 Alpha Sub JCT VNC LIS. Tsarael Tanelia Sansai Ioan. She scrolled past the costs for the cleaning fluid S, industrial ammonia 4 letters, and the disposal of personal effects incineration 40 key G. She scrolled to the bottom, looking for the justification code. Every eviction needed a legal code. She found it. ASACION, CUDI 77B, PREMPIV Southile Katanjonia froze. Code 77B was not a health code. It wasn't about unpaid rent. It wasn't about age. She clicked on the code. A sub-window opened, displaying the algorithm's logic tree. Tiri Jari Valmimes IANTRShualio Low OP. Partie VNCELAS risk factor high, legacy memory. Partisan Solano NIA asset potential high, productive labor. Nia stopped breathing. Her name was in the file. She read on, the text blurring as her eyes watered. ANLYSI. Subject Solano displays high compliance but low ideological integration. Daily exposure to Secu 7 and Hio 7 a.m. to Zo 70:18 a.m. has created a localized feedback loop. Audio surveillance detects subject VNC attempting to transfer oral history regarding system civil rights and community organization tactics during breakfast exchanges. T-chart assessment T, the interaction is non-transactional. Subject VNC is acting as a chaotic variable, reducing subject Solanos reliance on system validation. Continued exposure is projected to result in subject Solanos radicalization within 18 months. Sal UI on isolate subject Solano. Removal of catalyst of ANC. Nia clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. They hadn't killed him because he was old. They hadn't killed him because he was useless. They killed him because of her. She was the reason. Her desire for points, her daily visits, her polite nodding while he talked about his youth. The system had watched it all. It had analyzed the drift of her attention. It had calculated that the old man was making her human, and humanity was a defect in a worker drone. They didn't murder him to punish him. They murdered him to fix her. Asset reclaimed. They weren't reclaiming the apartment. They were reclaiming Nia. She scrolled down to the final line of the report. Pust CTIO Moninamji subject Solano to be observed for behavioral correction. Introduction of new engagement partner recommended to test compliance reset. Sujigista gisti sabi CT resident 4 to 5 gabriel marteche. The room spun. The hum of the computers sounded like a drill boring into her skull. It wasn't a coincidence. The system hadn't randomly assigned her to Martha. It was a test, a baited trap. They wanted to see if she would do it again. They wanted to see if she would attach herself to another, legacy memory, risk. If she bonded with Martha, Martha would die. If she stayed cold, Martha would live, but Nia would lose her soul completely, becoming exactly the hollow, efficient machine they wanted. The breakfast, in the title of her life, wasn't a meal. It was the crime. The military officers weren't the villains. They were the immune response attacking an infection. And the infection was love. Nia stared at the screen. The blue light washed over her face, turning her skin corpse pale. She looked at her wrist, 7 to 95. The number wasn't a score of how good she was. It was a measure of how successfully she had been hollowed out. Suddenly, a message popped up on her screen. A direct override from the supervisor terminal. User Salanao irregular cerh petar.xcd. PL Ace Rapio Manager KEL Amandia TL. Nia looked up. Across the room, Kale was awake. He was standing up, looking directly at her cubicle. He tapped his headset, listening to a voice on the line. Nia didn't think. She didn't calculate. She hit DLE on the window, though she knew the logs were permanent. She grabbed her bag. She stood up and walked, not toward Kale.
Solano!
Kale shouted. Stop! She pushed through the emergency bar. The alarm screamed. A piercing, rhythmic shriek that shattered the office calm. Do-H-O-P-to-O-P. Nia ran into the stairwell. She couldn't go home. They would be there. She couldn't go to Martha's. They were watching. She ran down toward the basement, down toward the only person who had told her the truth. She burst into the laundry level, gasping for air, the alarm echoing faintly through the concrete ceiling above. Darius was there, loading the shredder. He looked up, not surprised, but resigned. You looked, he said simply. Didn't you? They killed him because of me. Nia choked out, the tears finally falling. They killed him to keep me working. Darius stopped the machine. He walked over and gripped her shoulders. His hands were rough, stained with grace and the dust of other people's lives. Now you see the cage, Darius said. The question is, what are you going to do about the bait? Martha? Nia whispered. They assigned me Martha? And if you go back to her, Darius said, they'll kill her too. Eventually, once she's served her purpose of testing you. I can't go back, Nia said. I can't do it. If you don't go back, Darius said, his voice hard, you lose your status. You lose your apartment. You become a zero. You become me. He gestured around the damp, dark basement. Can you survive this, Nia? Can you survive being nothing? Nia looked at the shredder, at the pile of clothes waiting to be destroyed. I can't kill another one, she said. Then you have a choice, Darius said. He reached into his cart and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a rag. The system relies on predictability. It relies on you being afraid of losing what little you have. But if you're willing to lose everything, he unwrapped the object. It was an old, battered data drive, a physical drive, illegal for decades. This is the building's legacy cache, Darius said. Digital copies of the books, the music, the history they scrubbed from the apartments. I've been saving it, waiting for someone with access to the central broadcast node. He looked at her ID badge. Data verification admin access. You can't save Vance, Darius said. And you probably can't save Martha by just staying away. They'll find another way to purge her. But you can break the silence. If I upload this, Nia stared at the drive. That's treason. That's a life sentence. It's the only way to make the death mean something, Darius said. Make them hear him. Make them hear all of them. The alarm upstairs was getting louder. Steps were thudding down the stairwell. Nia looked at the drive. Then she looked at the ceiling, toward the floors above, where Martha Gable was knitting a scarf, waiting for a friend who was really an executioner. The title of the story shifted in her mind. Black Girl Brought Breakfast. It wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was the prologue to a war. Give it to me, Nia said. The stairwell was a throat of concrete, swallowing the sound of the sirens but amplifying the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots coming down from the upper levels. Nia didn't look back at the laundry room. She heard the metal door clang shut, the locking wheel spin, and then, a moment later, the muffled, wet sound of a suppression rifle firing 3 times. Darius was gone. The first cost had been paid. Nia scrambled up the service ladder inside the ventilation shaft, the same shaft her window looked out upon. The air here was thick with dust and the drone of massive fans. Her hands, usually manicured and clean for data entry, were black with grace. Her lungs burned. She was climbing the spine of the beast that had swallowed her whole. She needed a terminal. The administrative deck on the 12th floor was too far. The boots were already there. She needed a local node. Every apartment had one, but the public ones were monitored. She reached the grate for the 4th floor. Through the slats, she saw the hallway. It was bathed in flashing crimson emergency lights. The doors were sealed. The lockdown protocol was in effect. Nia kicked the grate. It rattled but held. She kicked again harder, panic lending her strength. The metal gave way with a screech that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. She tumbled out onto the floor, gasping. She was 10 feet from Unit 405. Martha. The system had assigned her to Martha to test her compliance. Now, fate was assigning her to Martha to test her resolve. Nia crawled to the door. She didn't have her access key. She had fled her desk without it. But she knew the override code for emergency medical access. She had processed enough of them. She punched the sequence into the keypad. 990 Alpha. The lock hissed. The door slid open. Nia fell inside and slapped the manual lock panel. The magnetic bolt slammed home. Martha Gable was standing in the center of the room, clutching a half-knitted scarf to her chest like a shield. The room smelled of old wool and steeping tea. The smell of a world that was being erased. Nia, Martha whispered, her eyes wide. The alarms. They said there was a dissident. Nia didn't answer. She scrambled to the small desk in the corner where Martha's basic access terminal sat. It was an old model, clunky and slow, used mostly for ordering rations and receiving government bulletins. I need your connection, Nia gasped. She pulled the battered data drive from her pocket. It felt heavy, like it contained lead instead of code. What is happening? Martha moved closer, her fear warring with a grandmotherly instinct to comfort. You're bleeding. Nia looked down at her hands. She had torn her knuckles on the grate. They killed Mr. Vance, she said, the words vomiting out of her. They killed him because I talked to him, and now they're going to kill us. She jammed the drive into the port. The screen flickered. The legacy cache was massive. Music, poetry, and laws from before the Citizenship Index. UPLO ADNTAD, DTO and CNTRL borrow ADEST no D. ESD IME ABNTS, 8 minutes. In a lockdown, 8 minutes was an eternity. Outside, the hallway thundered. The IDF had reached the floor. Naya could hear them clearing the rooms, moving methodically. Kick, shout, clear, next. Then, the building's internal speakers crackled to life. It wasn't the generic synthesized voice this time. It was a live feed. It was the officer from her apartment, the one with the amber eye strip. Citizen Solano, the voice boomed, echoing through the thin drywall of Unit 405. We have tracked your biometric signature to Sector 4. You are currently harboring Class A contraband. Nia stared at the progress bar. 2%. We know you are in a residential unit, the voice continued. The resident of that unit is currently listed as compliant. Citizen Martha Gable. Index 6040. Martha flinched at her name. She looked at the speaker on the wall, then at Nia. Listen closely. Citizen Solano, the officer said. We are initiating a block-wide purge protocol to contain the data leak. However, the system is merciful. If you surrender the drive and exit the unit within 60 seconds, we will classify this as a mental health episode. You will be re-educated. The resident, Ms. Gable, will be spared. The trap snapped shut. If you do not surrender, the voice said, colder now, we will breach. The use of kinetic force in a confined space has a 98% fatality probability for all occupants, including the elderly resident. Naya froze. Her hand hovered over the terminal, 20%. She looked at Martha. The old woman was trembling. She had done nothing wrong. She had just opened her door. She had just offered tea. If Nia kept uploading, the IDF would blow the door. Martha would die. Nia would die. But the data might get out. If Nia surrendered, the upload would stop. The drive would be destroyed. Mr. Vance's memory would be erased forever. But Martha would live to knit another scarf. It was the ultimate utilitarian calculus. The system loved these choices because it knew human beings were weak. It knew that immediate empathy usually overpowered abstract duty. Nia, Martha said softly. Nia turned, tears streaming down her suit-stained face. I can't stop it, Martha. If I stop, they win. They erase everyone? Who is everyone? Martha asked. Mr. Vance. You. Me, everyone who remembers. Nia pointed at the screen. This is the proof. This is the truth about the reclamations. If I upload this, the whole city sees it. They can't hide the murders anymore. Martha looked at the screen. She saw the file names scrolling by. Civil Rights Act, the Constitution, the 2024 archives. She looked at the door. The boots were getting closer. Thud, they were at Unit 402. 2 doors away. You brought him breakfast, Martha said. It wasn't a question. That's why you're here. Because you fed him. I just wanted the points, Nia sobbed. I was just trying to survive. No, Martha said, her voice suddenly steady. She walked over to the desk. She placed a wrinkled hand over Naya's shaking one. You weren't feeding him child. You were keeping him human. That's what they hate. They hate that we feed each other. 35%. Citizen Solano, the voice boomed. 30 seconds. Ania looked at the cancel button. I have to go out there, she whispered. I have to give it to them. I can't let them kill you. If you go out there, Martha said, gripping her hand tighter, you tell them I meant nothing. You tell them I was just a number. No. Nia shook her head. I can't. Martha reached out and touched Nia's face. Her fingers were cool. My grandson. He stopped visiting because he was afraid of his score. He stopped being my grandson and became a citizen. She looked at the door. If you surrender, you become one of them forever. And then I die anyway, just slower. Alone in the dark. Martha stepped back. She walked to the kitchenette. She picked up a heavy cast iron skillet from the drying rack. It was ridiculous. A piece of cookware against kinetic armor. But her posture was rigid. Finish it, Martha commanded. Martha, please! Finish it! The old woman shouted, a ferocity in her voice that defied her frailty. Do not let Elias die for nothing. Do not let me die for nothing. The boots stopped outside the door. Time expired, the officer's voice said. Naya turned back to the screen. 55%. She didn't hit cancel. She hit PRIY to CCL Arat. It diverted all power from the apartment's life support, heating, lights, air filtration, into the bandwidth. The lights in the apartment died. The only illumination was the blue glow of the progress bar and the red strobing from the hallway grate. Breaching. A voice said from the other side of the door. There was a hiss of hydraulics. The magnetic locks groaned. Sparks showered from the frame. Nia huddled over the terminal, using her body to shield the drive, as if her flesh could stop a bullet from hitting the code. Martha Gable stood in front of the door, holding her skillet, standing in the pitch black. She wasn't trembling anymore. She was humming. A low, tuneless melody, 68%. The door exploded inward. It wasn't a kick. It was a shaped charge. The metal warped and flew across the room. The concussion wave knocked Nia out of her chair. She hit the wall hard, her vision swimming. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the boots crunching on the debris. She saw the amber eyes cutting through the smoke. She saw Martha step forward, swinging the iron skillet with a pathetic, heroic scream. There was a flash of muzzle flare, a short, controlled burst. Thwip, thwip. Martha crumpled. She didn't fall like they did in the movies. She just dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Nia screamed, but no sound came out. She scrambled back to the terminal. 82%. The officer stepped over Martha's body without looking down. He raised the rifle, aiming directly at the terminal. Target acquired, he said. He wasn't aiming at Nia. He was aiming at the upload. Nia threw herself in front of the screen. The fatal flaw, the need for self-preservation, was gone, burned away by the sight of the old woman on the floor. Nia Solano, the girl who just wanted a window, was now the window herself. She looked the officer in the eye. "Shoot me," she hissed. "But you can't stop the signal." The officer paused. The logic of the situation had changed. A civilian shield, 90%. He lowered the aim slightly, not to kill, to disable. He pulled the trigger. The sound was not a bang. In the confined acoustic box of Unit 405, it was a physical slap of air pressure that hit Nia before the pain did. The kinetic round took her in the left shoulder. It was designed to incapacitate, to shatter the clavicle and sever the nerve cluster controlling the arm. It did its job perfectly. Nia was spun around by the force of the impact, her body slamming against the desk, her fingers slipping off the terminal. She hit the floor hard, the breath driven from her lungs. For a second, there was no pain, only a profound, freezing numbness spreading down her left side. Then, the nerves reconnected, and the world dissolved into a white, hot scream of agony. Through the haze of shock, she looked up. The progress bar on the screen was glowing. 99%. The officer stood over her. He was immense. A monolith of black composite armor. He didn't look at her. He looked at the screen. He raised his rifle butt, a brutal, efficient motion. CRASK. The stock of the weapon smashed into the terminal. Glass showered the room. The blue light flickered and died. The progress bar vanished into a spiderweb of fractured darkness. Nia gagged, tasting bile and blood. "Did it?" she wheezed, her vision tunneling. "Did it finish?" The officer didn't answer. He reached down and grabbed her by the collar of her tunic. He hauled her up effortlessly. Her left arm swung uselessly at her side, a dead weight of meat and bone. The pain was so intense it felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. He dragged her toward the door. Nia's boots scraped over the debris. They scraped over the knitting needles scattered on the floor. They scraped through the pool of blood spreading from under Martha Gable's body. Nia tried to look at Martha, but the officer jerked her head forward. "Eyes front, citizen." They emerged into the hallway. The lockdown had been lifted. The red emergency lights were gone, replaced by the sterile, unwavering white of the standard LEDs. And the doors of Unit 401, 402, 43, were open. The neighbors were watching. They stood in their doorframes, faces illuminated by the pale glow of their wrist projectors. They watched the IDF officer drag the bleeding woman and the body of the old woman toward the freight elevator. Nia looked at them. She recognized faces. There was the man from 402 who always complained about the draft. There was the young couple from 406 who were saving for a child license. "Help us!" Nia screamed. Her voice was ragged weak. "He killed her! Look at what they did!" No one moved. No one spoke. A woman in 403 raised her hand. Not to help. She tapped her wrist interface. She was filming. The realization hit Nia harder than the bullet. They weren't paralyzed by fear. They were consuming the spectacle. To them, this wasn't a tragedy, it was content. It was a security event to be shared and commented on. The officer dragged her into the freight elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off the gallery of eyes. The descent was silent. Nia slumped against the metal wall, clutching her shattered shoulder. The officer stood opposite her, checking his vitals on his HUD. He wasn't out of breath. He hadn't even raised his pulse. "You failed," Nia whispered, the defiance burning through the pain. The bar. It hit 99. It must have finished. The signal went out. The officer looked at her. The amber strip on his helmet dimmed, and with a hiss of pressurization, he unsealed the helmet. He pulled it off. Nia expected a monster. She expected a scared, hateful face. Instead, she saw a man who looked like an accountant. He was unremarkable, mid-40s, receding hairline, tired eyes. He looked like someone who worried about his mortgage. "It went out," the officer said. His voice was human now, stripped of the synthesizer, but it was even more terrifying for its banality. "We don't block signals, Miss Solano. Blocking creates curiosity. Blocking creates silence, and silence breeds conspiracy." "Then they saw it," Nia said, hope flaring in her chest. They saw the files, the history, the truth. The elevator reached the sub-basement. The doors opened. 2 medical drones were waiting, their mechanical arms poised with restraints and sedatives. They saw data. The officer said as he stepped aside to let the drones take her. Raw, uncontextualized data. Nia was strapped onto a gurney. The drones clamped her good arm and her broken one. A needle slid into her neck. The pain began to recede, replaced by a terrifying chemical calm. They wheeled her down a long, white corridor. It wasn't a prison. It was their education wing, indistinguishable from a hospital. "Where are you taking me?" Nia asked, her speech slurring. "Processing," the officer said, walking beside the gurney. "You have lost your citizenship status. You are now a ward of the state. The people will know." Nia mumbled. Darius said, "Make them hear." The officer stopped the gurney. He pulled a tablet from his utility belt. He tapped the screen and held it up for her to see. "This is the current feed from the central node," he said. Nia forced her eyes to focus. The screen showed the broadcast. The files from the legacy cache were there. The Civil Rights Act. The videos of protest from the 2020s. The poetry of resistance. But they were framed. The system had wrapped the upload in a graphic interface. A banner across the top read EXCLUSIVPREVEW. So1. JY sister odifag I am 5 disopio fan fatias y BROUGHETEB waf keltiurl prasirioan. Nia stared. Below the video player, the comments were scrolling in real time. User 992. Wow. The production value on these old clips is gritty. Love the aesthetic. User Alpha. Is this the backstory for the new game? User Beta. So glad we don't live in that chaos anymore. Imagine having to vote. Gross. User Gamma. Fake. The CGI on the protesters looks uncanny. No, Nia whispered. No, it's real. Tell them it's real. It doesn't matter if it's real. The officer said gently, as if explaining gravity to a child. It matters how it's categorized. We didn't delete your revolution, Nia. We monetized it. We turned it into entertainment. Now, watching it isn't an act of rebellion. It's just binge watching. He swiped the screen. And here is the report on the incident at Block 4. A new headline appeared. Domestic terror CL Narozidi. sci-fi assistant cell ACMPICE ATMPTOUPLOVIRs RIIDF restores ordar. There was a picture of Naya and a picture of Elias Vance. User Delta, she looks crazy, look at her eyes. User Epsilon for 1 for the IDF. Keep us safe. User Zeta, why did she kill the old lady? Sick. Nia began to weep, not from pain, but from a total, devastating hollowness. She had sacrificed everything. She had gotten Mr. Vance killed. She had gotten Martha killed. She had lost her arm, her freedom, her life. And the system hadn't even blinked. It had just eaten her tragedy and used it to sell ad space. This is the trap you didn't see, the officer said, signaling the drones to move again. You thought the enemy was silence. The enemy isn't silence. The enemy is noise. We just added your noise to the pile. The gurney moved through a set of double doors. The sign above them read Bishe Vi Orel Koaren and Assisichimitiemat. Nia looked up at the ceiling lights passing overhead. Flash, flash, flash. She realized then the true meaning of the title. Black Girl Brought Breakfast to Old Man Daily. It sounded like a headline. A clickbait title. A snippet of content to be consumed and forgotten. She hadn't broken the system. She had just provided it with today's episode. What happens to me? Nia whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the gurney's wheels. The officer didn't look back this time. He just walked away, back toward the elevator, back to his life, back to his metrics. A medical technician leaned over her. His face was covered by a surgical mask. His eyes were blank. We fixed the glitch, the technician said. He placed a mask over her face. The gas smelled of sweet almonds. Count backward from 10, the technician instructed. 10, Nia whispered. She thought of Mr. Vance's oatmeal. 9, she thought of Martha's tea. 8, she thought of the stain on the floor. 7, she thought of the point she almost had. 6, the darkness took her. It wasn't the peace of death. It was the suspension of the self, the reboot. Outside, the city continued. The drones flew. The elevators hummed. And on thousands of screens, citizens watched the historical fiction of their own stolen freedom, eating their gray oats, feeling grateful that they weren't the crazy girl on the news. The system had asserted itself. It had taken the blood of the martyrs and turned it into ink for the ledger. 6 months later, the morning light in Block 9 was different. It filtered through a mesh of security grating that turned the sun into a grid of harsh, bright diamonds on the floor. Block 9 was a rehabilitation zone, a place for citizens with low scores, criminal records, or histories of mental instability. Nia Solano woke up at 0600. She did not check the weather. She did not check her citizenship index. The number was tattooed on the wall of her cell, like dormitory Tier 5 probationary. She sat up, her left arm hummed. It was a cheap, industrial prosthetic, exposed servos, matte gray plastic, and a grip that crushed cups if she wasn't careful. The state didn't pay for mimicry for traders, it paid for function. She walked to the communal kitchenette. There were no private dispensers here. There was a trough of nutrient paste. Nia took her ladle, filled her bowl, and sat at a long metal table surrounded by other, corrected, citizens. They ate in silence. Silence was the only currency they had left. Nia chewed the flavorless paste. She didn't taste it. She didn't taste anything anymore. The correction therapy had been thorough. It hadn't erased her memory. That would be inefficient. Instead, it had severed the emotional connective tissue attached to the memories. She could remember Martha Gable's face, but looking at it in her mind was like looking at a stock photo of a stranger. She could remember the sound of the gunshot, but it evoked no fear, only a factual acknowledgement of cause and effect. She was cured. She was safe. At 0700, the work whistle blew. Nia stood up, bussed her tray, and marched to the assignment board. Her role had changed. She was no longer a data processor. She was too unstable for the network. Now, she was part of the Hygiene and Sanitation Corps. She was a scrubber. She collected her cart, buckets, mops, and the heavy jugs of industrial ammonia that smelled of copper and regret. She pushed the cart toward the service elevator. The wheels squeaked, a rhythm that replaced the beating of her heart. Squeak, thud, squeak, thud. Her assignment today was back in Block 4. The system liked irony. It reinforced the lesson. She rode the service elevator up to the 8th floor. The hallway looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago. The same gray carpet, the same humming lights. But the air felt different. It was sterile. The social blind spots had been filled with cameras. There were no shadows left. Nia pushed her cart to Unit 809. The door was open. The current tenant, a mid-tier logistics manager, had moved out that morning. Nia's job was to reset the unit. She stepped inside. The room was empty. The legacy, artifacts that Mr. Vance had cherished were long gone. The smart sensors that Julian had installed were still there, blinking softly in the corners. Nia began to mop. She started in the corner by the window, working her way toward the center. The ammonia stung her nose, but she inhaled it deeply. It was the smell of order. She reached the spot where the armchair used to be, the spot where the stain had been. The concrete was clean now, pristine. She scrubbed it anyway. Back and forth, back and forth. Her mechanical arm didn't tire. It was a perfect machine, unburdened by the weakness of bone or empathy. As she worked, the wall screen flickered to life. It was set to the default, SETI Pulse channel. A trailer for a new show began to play. Com igcsio t hasio arnen epul or violent. Orchestral music swelled. On the screen, a dramatized version of a hallway appeared. It was dark, gritty, stylized. A woman appeared on screen. She was beautiful, her hair perfectly messy, her uniform torn to reveal a hint of skin. She looked like Nia, but a better, more marketable version of Nia. Narada R. She wanted to save the past. He wanted to protect the future. A handsome actor playing the IDF officer kicked down a door. There was an explosion. Then, a shot of the Martha character. In the show, she wasn't a frail grandmother knitting scarves. She was cackling, holding a bomb detonator, her eyes wild with fanaticism. Narada R. Based on the true story of the Block 4 insurrection, the on-screen Nia screamed, "Burn it all down," and threw a switch. The real Nia stood in the center of the empty room, leaning on her mop, watching the lie unfold. She felt a dull pressure in her chest. It wasn't anger. The correction had removed her capacity for anger. It was just recognition. They had taken the most painful moment of her life, the moment she lost her soul, and turned it into a Tuesday night drama for Tier 2 citizens to watch while they ate their dinner. The trailer ended. THECC Toma GHT88. Nia looked down at the floor. It was shining. Clean, she whispered. She packed up her cart and moved to the hallway. As she walked toward the elevator, the door to Unit 805 opened. It was the unit where a young family had moved in recently. A girl stepped out. She was young, maybe 19. She wore the gray tunic of a Tier 3 administrative assistant. Her hair was pulled back tight. She looked tired. In her hands, she held a thermal container. Nia froze. The wheels of her cart stopped squeaking. The girl looked up and saw Nia. She saw the orange jumpsuit of the sanitation corps. She saw the mechanical arm. Her eyes widened in fear. She hid the container behind her back. I was just going to the trash chute," the girl stammered. Nia looked at her. She looked at the shape of the container behind the girl's back. It wasn't trash. It was oatmeal. Or soup. It was breakfast. Nia looked down the hall, Unit 807. An old man lived there. A legacy case who walked with a cane. The pattern was restarting. The girl was lonely. The old man was lonely. The girl wanted points, but she would stay for the stories. She would listen. She would form a bond. She would create a blind spot. And then the officers would come. And the girl would die. Or she would become this. A hollow thing pushing a mop. Nia felt a flicker of something in her brain. A ghost of the old Nia. A desperate urge to speak. "Warn her," the ghost screamed. Tell her to run. Tell her the oatmeal is a trap. Tell her that compassion is a capital crime. Nia opened her mouth. The trash chute is to the left, Nia said. Her voice was flat, metallic. The girl blinked, relieved.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, just trash. The girl hurried past her, clutching the container. She didn't go to the trash chute. She went to Unit 807. She knocked softly. The door opened. The old man smiled. The girl stepped inside. The door clicked shut. Nia stood alone in the hallway. She looked at her wrist. She didn't have a projector anymore. She had a compliance band. It had a single button, Rapartayan. If she reported the girl, the IDF would come. They would audit the timeline. They would find the unauthorized dependency. The girl would be stopped before she could radicalize. If Nia reported her, she would get points. If she got points, she could move out of Block 9. She could get a window. She could get heat. The ghost in her mind wept. It begged her to walk away. It begged her to let the girl have her small, human moment. But Nia Solano was a survivor. She was a product of the system, refined and perfected by loss. She knew now that there were no heroes, only assets and liabilities. The girl was a liability. Nia raised her mechanical arm. The servo whined softly. She pressed the button. Rairaladas USPCIOUSITY. Sesituar 4. Araurdef Wampano Ciarde. A small green light blinked on her band. A hit of dopamine, synthesized and delivered. Nia felt a sense of calm. She had done her duty. She had protected the girl from the mistake of being human. She grabbed the handle of her cart and pushed it toward the elevator. Squeak. Thud. Squeak. Thud. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the view of the hallway, Nia stared at her reflection in the polished metal. She looked at the dead eyes, the gray skin, the machine arm. She thought of the title of the show she had seen on the screen. The Asset. No, she thought. That wasn't the title. The real title floated in the silence of the elevator, invisible and heavy, written in the blood of the past and the ink of the report she had just filed. Black girl brought breakfast to Old Man Daly. One day, military officers arrived at her door. She closed her eyes. And she opened it. Nia whispered to the empty car. The elevator descended, taking her down into the dark, warm belly of the machine that would never, ever stop eating. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. If the silence in the hallway stayed with you, and if you believe that some stories need to be heard, even when they are uncomfortable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep the signal alive. We release new dark fiction every week, exploring the systems that bind us and the choices that define us. Until next time, stay safe and watch the doors.